All right, I think we should get started. It's 11:02. Welcome, everyone. It's pleasure to have you. This is Women in ETF virtual event. I'm Tatiana Baleja, the co-head of the San Francisco chapter. And I'd like to start our session today with a brief overview of this fantastic organization. Our mission is to support, connect, and inspire women in the ETF industry. If you would like to learn more, explore leadership opportunities, we actually have a number of openings available at this time. Please reach out directly. You can contact us through the website or indicate your interest in the chat box below, and we'll be in touch. Our committee works on providing networking, educational, mentoring events and opportunities. Membership is free. It's easy to sign up on our website so that you continue to receive information on the upcoming events. In today's webinar, we'll learn about democracy as a factor in international investing. It will be an interactive session. We welcome your question in the chat box below. And now to the exciting part. It is my great pleasure to introduce Julie Kane. She's the CEO of Democracy Investments. She brings over 25 years of background in the financial services industry and quite impressive bio. Not only she is known for building new brands and strategies at the companies like Wells Fargo, Charles Schwab, SEI, she is a former US Navy helicopter pilot and is passionate about impact investing and fueling the growth of democracy globally. She is joined today by Christopher Brown, Chief Investment Officer of Democracy Investments, as well as Richard Rikowski, Chief Economist. Welcome.
Thank you, Tatiana. It's exciting to be here. And thank you for your leadership and thank you to all the sponsors of Women in ETFs as well.
Of course. Let's begin with the poll question. The question is, should global democracy trends be considered as factors, as investment factors? So you'll see the question displayed on the screen. If you could just take a moment to give your response. Okay, we got some maybes. Got some yes. I'll share the responses. All right. So 20% participants responded yes, and 80% said maybe. Great. Julie, can you tell us about your career and what brought you into this investment style?
Sure. Thank you, Tatiana. So I began my career in the Navy, as you mentioned. I flew helicopters in San Diego and the Philippines. Got to fly the Navy SEALs around and some pretty exciting missions very early in my life. And here we are on Pearl Harbor Day. Not only did I serve, but my grandfather was a P-38 pilot in World War II. And my dad was an immigrant from Germany. So he actually barely got out before the war. So you could say it's thanks to democracy that I even exist. And full circle, after the Navy, I ended up in financial services and saw the power of the dollar, and was also watching how capital is flowing into authoritarian states. authoritarians who are stealing our tech, messing with our elections, conducting genocide, child labor, cyber attacks, the list goes on. And it feels like many investors are not aware that their international portfolios could be fueling the growth of those economies. Our mission is to reverse that and get the capital to flow more towards democracies like our country. Our world, our product is our strategy is ex-US, but we're shifting capital towards democracies that care about freedom of speech, free and fair elections, and civil liberties. My first job out of the Navy was at SEI Investments, and our fund is actually on their platform now. So that's been really fun. I was in their class of first junior military officers, went to grad school at UCLA, then did some management consulting, and then ended up at Autodesk Ventures, which is where I met our chief investment officer, Chris Brown. And after Autodesk, back into financial services. So really enjoy the industry and couldn't be more excited to be here today and to share our strategy and get everyone's feedback on it.
That's great. So it's obvious that you clearly are very passionate about this. Give us a little bit more background. Why are you so passionate about this particular strategy, and why are you doing this as a firm?
Sure. So all three of us are worried about democracy. It's so important for our future, and you'll see some research later that democracy is clearly under attack. And we've been, as I said, the industry has allowed, capital to pour into these authoritarian countries. And I served in a third world country and saw firsthand we cannot take our freedoms for granted. And Tatiana, your heritage as well. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yes, I was born in Ukraine and raised in Russia. It's definitely not easy to watch these countries go through conflict at the moment. It's concerning.
Yeah, every day there's something new on the news, and we don't see it turning around. Chris spent time in Venezuela in his youth, and Rick is close to DOD. And when I talk to my friends who are still serving, it's very alarming. It's not, we don't see the trends reversing anytime soon. But what more powerful way than a strategy, an asset management strategy that starts to shift those trends towards democracies.
Okay. So tell us more about the Economist Democracy Index and how does it determine the country democracy scores?
Sure. So the Economist has been tracking country democracy scores since 2006, and they use 62 different indicators. And those indicators roll up into themes such as electoral process and pluralism, civil liberties, functioning of government, political participation, and political culture. So every year in January, every country gets a score, with 0 being the worst and 10 being the best. And that is published, it's publicly available, so that every country can see how they're doing. And our longer term goal, as our strategy evolves, is to incentivize every country to improve their democracy score. So the countries that score well are countries like Norway, Sweden, New Zealand, Canada, the UK, Taiwan, Switzerland, and the usual suspects at the bottom of the list that are full authoritarians are Saudi Arabia, China, UAE, Egypt, Russia, etc. And I'm actually going to share my screen and show you a map of the Economists. So here you can see the full democracies are score an 8 to a 10 in the blue. The more pale blue is flawed democracies, a score of 7 to 8. Hybrid regimes are 5 to 6. in the yellow. And then the red and orange are the authoritarian regimes who score a 4 and below. And here you can see the country scores for all the countries that are in our portfolio, which is our strategy, as I said, is all world ex-US. And we reweight it to, and we'll go more into detail on our methodology and the strategy in just a moment here. But before we do that, I think we have another poll question to kind of tee up some research that Dr. Rakossi is going to share, our chief economist, on trends in democracy globally.
Yes, this is a fascinating way of looking at the world. Thank you, Julie. So our next poll question, so globally, over the last 5 years, democracy has been in rapid decline, in slow decline, no change, or improving. So please submit your responses. Okay. I'm going to share results. So does this represent with the actual facts that most people think that it's either in slow decline or there's no change or it's improving?
Great question, Tatiana. Let's get into that. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rakossi to go into some research on this. So you should be able to see our starting point. Go ahead, Rick.
Hey, thanks, Julie. So what we're looking at here is a graph of the democracy score of the entire world except the US by year. And calculating the democracy score for the entire world is actually, you can do it several different ways. So the graph on the left actually shows what The Economist has been showing. And they've been describing the systematic meltdown of democracy since about 2015 globally. And we've zoomed out the graph so much that the trend that they're describing and really concerned about doesn't even look that pronounced. And that's because I'm going to show you other ways in which democracy looks like it's even in more of a meltdown. But if you just take all the countries and you average them together, the global democracy score on average is in the what we call hybrid regime territory. These are countries where they kind of hold elections, but people put their thumbs on the scale. And it's been in decline. It's declined from about 5.55 to about 5.4 over the last 5 years. If instead you don't average countries together and say that Bhutan and India get equal weight, but you weigh them according to their population, the downward trend is more pronounced. Not only is it in a hybrid regime, but it's going downhill rapidly, and probably by 2030, the average person on Earth will be living in an authoritarian state. Next slide, please. So we're obviously interested in finance. And so you can also calculate a democracy score based on dollars. So the slide on the left shows the state of global democracy in terms of the average dollar of GDP. If you go back to about 2006, 2007, the average GDP was in a high functioning, slightly flawed democracy. Since then, the trend has been pronouncedly downwards, and today the average GDP is at the very bottom of the flawed democracy regime, and in a couple of years will be into hybrid regime territory. And if that trend continues 10 to 20 years, we're going to be looking at the average GDP dollar coming from an authoritarian country. Lastly, on the right, since we invest and we allocate our money, the question is, where is the average invested dollar? And if you look at the average invested dollar all the way back in 2007, 2006, 2008, it was in a solid full democracy, because the democracies historically have stronger economies, and that's the money gets invested. There's been a very significant trend towards moving dollars into authoritarian countries. And that has led to a significant decline in the average, in the country of the average dollar. So today, the average dollar is in a flawed democracy. In probably 10 to 15 years, we're looking at the average dollar invested globally being in a hybrid regime. So this is global, and I want to just walk you quickly through a couple regions so you understand how that's progressing. If you look at the Americas, the graph on the left shows the mean democracy by country in the Americas, and it's a hybrid regime, and it's slowly going, or sorry, it's a flawed democracy, but nearly it's approaching hybrid regime territory. It's slowly on the decline. If you look at it, the population weighted story is also similar, slow decline heading towards hybrid regime. Next slide, Julie. If you look at it GDP weighted, it's pushed more towards the democracies because the democracies have higher scores. And interestingly, on a market cap weighted basis, the Americas ex-US are actually trending up. And it's in full democracy territory, the average dollar invested. And that is because Canada is an economic juggernaut. They're about 1/4 the population of Brazil, but they have the same sized economy. And they're pretty much carrying the Western Hemisphere on their shoulders when the US isn't around. So that's actually encouraging. Next slide, please. Western Europe also is showing a mild decline on the average score, as well as the population weighted score. Both show slight downward trends. Next slide, please. On a GDP weighted basis, it's a slight upward trend, not that much. And on a mean market cap weighted basis, it's pretty horizontal. So Western Europe really isn't much of a problem right now. It's looking pretty good. Now, Eastern Europe is where things start to get interesting. If you look at the average country, it's a hybrid regime and it's trending downwards towards authoritarianism. So 10 to 20 years, unless things accelerate, the average country will be authoritarian in Eastern Europe. If you look at the population weighted, the average person is already living in an authoritarian country in Eastern Europe. Now, if you look at GDP weighting, the meltdown is faster. And while the average dollar started out in a hybrid regime, but almost in a flawed democracy, today it's gone downhill rapidly. And we should expect to see the average GDP being in an authoritarian regime probably within 10 years. In terms of market cap, in terms of raw investment though, the decline has been even more significant and it's already bouncing right at the threshold of authoritarianism. So Eastern Europe has seen a rapid decline. So Asia is where the distinction between averaging countries and population weighting really matters. In Asia, you basically have China, India, and everybody else. And so because if you simply average the countries together, there's a slight upward trend in democracy in Asia. And this is what The Economist was talking about, saying actually they're very happy with the progress in Asia. Unfortunately, if you look on the right, once you population weight it, democracy has been going downhill fairly quickly and rapidly approaching authoritarianism across Asia. Next slide. If you look at the GDP weighted democracy score, though, it's going down considerably faster. It started off mostly invested in flawed or most production was happening in flawed democracies. And today it is in the hybrid regime territory. Market cap has been even worse. Starting out at one point in 2007, the average dollar invested was invested in a full democracy. Today, it's in a flawed democracy. Within 5 years, it'll be a hybrid regime, and it's getting worse. And so last, we come to Africa and the Middle East. The average country is already an authoritarian state. The average person is living in an authoritarian state. If you look at the GDP weighted democracy index, they're pretty much, again, the average production's in an authoritarian state. But what's really frightening is the graph on the right, which shows the average dollar invested. You go back to 2007, the average dollar invested was in a very high functioning, albeit slightly flawed democracy. That's where we were concentrating our investment. Today, this has fallen from 7.5 to below 5. So it's right on the cusp of entering an authoritarian territory. Within a couple of years, the average dollar invested in Africa, in the Middle East, will be invested in authoritarian states. So I hope that I've convinced you at this point that we're pushing our money towards the authoritarians.
Well, thank you so much for walking us through these insightful graphs. Incredibly powerful information. How do you think your strategy could impact trends in democracy globally going forward?
Well, I think before we get there, we should just talk really briefly about the microeconomics of being a smart CEO running a company, right? If you're running a company, you've got profits, and you've got a low PE ratio, the logical thing is to buy back your stock. This is just classic CEO playbook versus if you have a high PE ratio, you sell more shares, you go out and you buy cheap companies and buy cheap profits, right? Now, take that to the macro scale. Suppose all the companies in your country have low PE ratios. They're buying back stock, their shareholders are being rewarded, but the country's economy is not rapidly expanding. On the other hand, if your country has a high PE ratio generally, those companies are able to issue more shares and grow rapidly. So by funneling money towards authoritarian states, we're pumping up their PE ratios and allowing the authoritarian economies to grow faster than the democratic economies. So our strategy is to try to redirect money from the authoritarian states to the democracies. And to first order, what does that do? It slows down the economic growth of the authoritarians and it accelerates the growth of the democratic economies. And there's a lot of different ways you can invest, and some people just want to cut authoritarian countries out of their portfolios, and that's great, that's fine. But if you only do that, we're left with the status quo, which is you have half the world being democratic, half the world being authoritarian, and we're in a quagmire. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to pull people towards democracy. And so where our strategy is a little bit different than simply divesting entirely of the authoritarians, what we do is we invest proportionally to both the market cap of companies and their democracy scores, so that if a country becomes even moderately more democratic, they get a little bit more money. And if they become moderately less democratic, they lose money. And so this makes it actually a very simple strategy. It's very easy to understand because the criteria that make up the democracy index are published. Everyone knows exactly how it works. It's perfectly transparent. And because our strategy is passive, it's actually automatic. And in the deterrence community, this gives what they call credibility to what you're doing. So that's what we're attempting to do. We're trying to engage in an investment strategy that makes macroeconomic adjustments to promote democracy while at the same time creating an incentive structure that is credible.
Great. Tell us a little bit more about your methodology.
Yeah, so Rick does a good segue into that. I'll start with a story, and that basically was Julie and I were working with some research firms and looking at various investment strategies to employ, and we became concerned about this level of passive investment in authoritarian regimes and the way that indices were being constructed perfectly naturally using market cap weightings. But market cap weightings didn't really account for a lot of the factors that Rick and Julie have been discussing this morning. So we were trying to figure out a way, okay, how can we adjust for these various things? And I'm going to Rick has been coming about this from more of a policy standpoint. I'm going to come at it from a little bit more of an investment standpoint. We had been, basically the idea was if we could give authoritarians more capitalism, they might become more like us and trade and do global trade. My background, I came from Thunderbird, the International Business School. I was class of '98 there, and it was everything was big in going east and in international business development. And we thought this was going to be a, sort of a halcyon days after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and that global democracy, global capitalism, free exchange of goods and services were going to predominate. Well, fast forward several years to roughly 2012, 2013, and those things had not materialized, or at least were rapidly getting reversed, and we had concern about it, both from a moral and ethical standpoint, as well as from an investment standpoint. Just from a rationale perspective, just believing that free markets and free people are going to lead to better economic outcomes in the long run, than trying to look at authoritarians as an investment option. And the authoritarian can work out in the short term, but over a market cycle, I think we've had enough proof that doesn't work. So one day at a dinner, Julie, Rick, and I are sitting together trying to crack this problem, and Rick suggests, well, why don't we use the Economist Democracy Index? I've been modeling some COVID data on it, using it, and we were off to the races. It provides the type of adjustment that's needed to account for these, I'll call it moral and ethical discrepancies. And our methodology is, as Rick said, very, very simple. We take an all-world ex-US index. We use Solactive in this particular case, and assign a country of risk to every single country in the portfolio. Once we've done that, we match up the market cap weighting of that company with the democracy score from the country of risk, multiply those things through. So the quick example, Taiwan Semiconductor is the largest holding in any of those market cap weighted indices. We take that market cap weighting, multiply it by the Taiwan democracy score, and get a raw score. Do that for all roughly 2,500 names, then normalize, go back to 100, and that is the Democracy Investments International Index. We launched the index March 31st. We have, versus our other market cap weighted index counterparts, we have seen through at least the close of last week, some very nice smart beta, I'll say, with it, because the forces that we thought were going to play out have played out to a certain extent, in terms of authoritarians have underperformed in the market. We can go into, as if have a little bit more time, sort of the small, very small sector shifts that are in the portfolio. But really, what has been driving it is a tilt away from authoritarians, which has pushed more money towards the Eurozone, Taiwan, the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth countries. So we think that going forward, and we can, I think there's another question on this further, but certainly that going forward, democracies have an excellent opportunity to outperform. We think that with COVID and the shifting global supply chains that are going on as we speak right now, that will end up penalizing more authoritarian regimes as companies will want, I'll call it, at least more sort of stable, predictable, steady, and understandable supply chains from friendlier jurisdictions.
Interesting. Thank you for sharing the methodology and being very, specific and transparent about how the index is designed. Very helpful to understand. I'm curious how the fund has performed so far, and who's your competition?
Well, the there is a fund where, for compliance purposes, I can't go into too much other depth in terms of naming and things like that. There are other like I said, we've had some very nice smart beta relative to sort of the larger, what is it, usual suspects names that have index product in here. All very good product. We just came up with a better way of tilting it in a systematic fashion, in a simple, transparent, systematic fashion. And so we've, generally seen some healthy, I'll just call it healthy outperformance or smart beta from inception to date on the fund.
Great. And what's your outlook for investing internationally?
Well, so first of all, international markets are cheap. U.S. markets are trading at relatively, 22 times on a PE basis, on a consensus PE basis. And international markets as a whole are trading at about a 15 and a half multiple. Now, everyone sort of said international has been cheap. It has underperformed over the last 10 years or so. But again, the valuation difference is so strong at this particular point that if you were looking certainly at a defensive strategy, you probably got a little bit more cushion looking internationally than you do in the U.S. just because valuations are at such a level. Again, back to the idea of favoring democracies over authoritarians, shifting supply chains. I think folks that are more aligned, I think you're going to see again. I don't know if it'll go back to Cold War status, but certainly an alliance of more democratic nations wanting to do business with one another as a bulwark against authoritarian regimes.
Interesting. Let's do another poll question and see if our audience thinks that if the democratic countries will have more stable economic growth over the long term versus the authoritarian regimes. Okay, I think there's many opinions. I'm going to share results. Do you have your own long-term predictions regarding the growth for democracies?
Rick, you want to take that one?
Well, corruption has a cost, right? That said, the flip side of it is that there is we live in a world with free trade and pervasive cyber espionage, right? So we do have a long-term trend towards per capita GDP and technological parity. And you see that where every so often a country will sort of launch and rise, and their per capita income will slowly approach that of the first world. So you will see those launches periodically, but I think that the cost of corruption, the cost of dishonesty, the limited number of business deals you can do if you don't trust your counterparts, and you have to bake in high risk premiums, all those things are going to hinder the authoritarian and corrupt countries in the long run, I believe. So, do we lose Tatiana?
No, I'm still here.
Okay.
Definitely a lot to think about And what are the hopes? What are the, your aspirations and long-term goals behind democracy as a factor in investing?
Well, as we get bigger, as I said earlier, we will be able to incentivize countries to want to improve their democracy scores. And any country can look up exactly what they need to do to get more capital. So we're literally trying to start a whole new category of thinking about impact investing with democracy as a factor. And Rick can speak to the numbers of as the strategy grows, the impact it would have on other countries.
Well, I think, in order for us to have in order for a strategy like this to really have an impact, you've got to have tens of billions of dollars of AUM. And I think that if strategies like ours had about 100 billion in AUM, that would remove about 1 month's net capital inflow from authoritarian countries. So that's the sort of order of magnitude you have to get to have to start seeing effects. But bigger picture, we came out of the Cold War thinking we were, that communism was this global threat. Communism went away, but authoritarianism didn't. And we assumed that the disappearance of communism was good enough. And what we're seeing today is that with rebounding authoritarianism, and frankly, authoritarians that now have free market economies, so they're economically more powerful, we need additional sort of global infrastructure, for lack of a better term, to promote democracy and prevent the rise of authoritarianism. I don't think that our fund by itself is going to single-handedly change the entire planet unless we somehow get to be gargantuan and have like $1 trillion of AUM. But I think that it's one of many tools, and that we need essentially like 1,000 points of pressure, a whole bunch of different solutions, all pushing towards democracy. And we need more creativity. We need a lot more ideas, and we will probably see copycat products, and that's probably a good thing for the globe. Maybe not so good for us as a company, but hey, it's good for democracy. And it's not just about equities. It can be all forms of investment. It can be things outside of investment. But we need new forms of pressure to constantly push the world away from authoritarianism and stabilize it in favor of democracy.
Well said.
Yeah, and Rick's, I mean, I'll that's what I like to call the heart argument, and as well the head argument. Freer economies, freer people tend to economically outperform ones that are stood on, and just the levels of incentives that exist there. And I always like to use the joke, if we think that the authoritarians are going to outperform democracies, then I'm way late on my plans for global domination, right? I mean, I've got to sort of figure something else out here. So I think it all stems from, a deep belief that people who have control over their own lives will work out their economic destinies best. And that's a good investment thesis in and of itself. But when you combine it with just the moral aspects of what authoritarians can have and do to their populaces, it becomes what we hope is a very persuasive argument.
Yeah, and this is what the impact investing is about.
The democracies are going to have less environmental fouls. They're going to have less in human rights in human rights issues. They're going to tend to not fund stuff that it would be directly against every single American citizen's interest. So there are just issues there that we have as investors in the United States have glossed over. or haven't paid attention to, that should be a factor. And what our research shows is that there's very little economic give up to follow a strategy like this. And since we've launched, we've actually shown some outperformance just versus a passive strategy. And we think that I can make a good argument that I think, and just based again on the shifting supply chains and how either, if you think we're going back over or we're coming out, how democracies are going to outperform, certainly over the next market cycle. So we think that we think that we've got a very good low cost mousetrap that compensates for deficiencies that might exist in just pure market cap weighted portfolios.
And we should probably point out, you can get more information about our strategy at www.democracyinvestments.com. As Chris said, we launched March 31st of this year, and our fund is listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And we'd love your feedback. Wondering if there are questions from the audience. Oh, here we go. Do you know of any similar strategies in other countries that include the US on a democratic scale? We are not aware of any at this time. Great question. Any other questions or feedback?
Another question.
Did you see another question?
I don't see another one yet.
Julie, but going back to this question about US democracy score was around just over 7, right?
Right, it's 7.92 between France and Portugal.
Okay.
So yeah, the US is a flawed democracy.
Definitely room for improvement there.
Yeah. So
surprisingly, the biggest thing that drags our score down is Congress. We get a poor functioning of government score because of congressional partisan bickering.
But our ranking stayed the same this last year because our score, while we went down in functioning of government, we went up in political participation.
All right. Well, hopefully the trend continues.
Any other questions from the audience? Well, Tatiana, I'd like to thank you again. Thank you for hosting us on Pearl Harbor Day. We is a great organization. I encourage everyone to share the great work of Women in ETFs with our networks and get more folks involved. It's a volunteer organization. So thank you again, Tatiana, to you and your colleagues who make all this happen. We're incredibly grateful to be here, and wishing everyone a joyous holiday season.
Thank you so much, Julie. It was a fascinating presentation, very informative. I think it, I wouldn't say it changes the way I look at the world, but it definitely adds a new dimension that's very important. It's good to understand as we just make simple life choices, and hopefully we see improvement.
Agreed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate your time. There is a question if the slides and recording will be shared. We are able to post recording of this session on our website. And so once this happens, there's typically communication going out to the members, informing that the recording is published. So stay tuned. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you everyone again, and happy holidays. Bye.
Thank you.
Tatiana.
Bye.